I'm Caitlin Barney. I'm a non-Indigenous woman born and raised here in Meanjin, and I'm an academic within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies unit and also affiliated with the School of Music.
Hi everyone, my name is Nissa. So I immigrated to Australia when I was a baby. On my mum's side, we've got Crimean Tatar and Southern European heritage, and on my dad's side, Yucatec Mayan and Mexican. So I did my undergrad here and I'm a student, and I'm also a research assistant on this project.
Okay. Weren't you going to say something about?
Okay, so we're just today presenting on some findings. We're presenting some findings from a teaching innovation grant that focuses on embedding storying within Indigenous studies.
Good morning. What's that? There, is that better? All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this session. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tracy Bunder. I'm a Noogie Waka Waka woman. And one of the things that I have been doing with the support of Italy is looking to Indigenise curriculum across the university. So this presentation today comes out of a teaching innovation grant that we were awarded. And these are the findings. We worked with the concept of storying. You may or may not know that I wrote a book around telling stories. When Auntie Mary was talking this morning, she was talking about, relationalism, and part and parcel of relationalism is the ability to be able to connect across people and across country. And one of the techniques that's able to do that is within our practice, asking each other to tell our stories to each other. So what I wanted to do this morning is just read a bit of a story for you, something that I wrote in part of my own learning and growing up within my family. And I tell this story as part of my genealogical knowledge, but I also do it so that the memory of the old people who told me this story doesn't dissipate, so that it's there with me all the time. So one of the things Auntie Mary said this morning is that place or country precedes knowledge. In this particular context, for me, it's telling that story of place, but also people within that place as well. Wasn't until I was a young woman. Now I consider myself an old woman, but when I was a younger woman, I hadn't realised that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were not given birth certificates. So birth certificates are part of the certification, I suppose, of being a member or a citizen of the country. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people weren't given birth certificates at a particular time. And that happened to my father. So let me just read this story. My father did not have a birth certificate. And this was made known when he applied to enlist for World War II. His year and date of birth were orally recorded by an accidental meeting of my two grandmothers who crossed paths at the then Department of Native Affairs, which is George Street, where they were each seeking permissions to travel. Now, moments of Aboriginal people were vigorously policed under the Act. And here in Queensland, what was legislated was the Protection of Aborigines and the Restriction of the Sale of Opium Act. And that was a legislation, I know it's interesting, huh? That there was this legislation that controlled not only Aboriginal people, but Chinese people as well. And of course, Aboriginal people and Chinese people were meeting on the frontier. So the legislation which sought not only to separately control Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people and Chinese people, particularly from connecting, it failed because there are a whole bunch of Wangs and Sams and Keys and within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. So movements of Aboriginal people were vigorously policed under the Act, ensuring that no unwarranted Aboriginal presences would cross the boundaries between black and white and thus avert imagined threatenings of safety and security for white people. Such imagined threats and the control of Aboriginal movements were recast as a need to so-called protect Aboriginal people from the vices of white societies. In turn, this signalled the segregation of Aboriginal people away from the wider community onto Aboriginal reserves, designated by the white nation as spaces of protection. Though depending on the mental state of the supervisors in care of Aboriginal people, such reserves could in fact be very punitive spaces where heartbreaking sadness and terror and hunger and deprivation reigned. Standing in the offices of the Department of Native Affairs, my maternal grandmother was pregnant with my mother. Got that? My maternal grandmother was pregnant with my mother, and my paternal grandmother held the hand of a little boy about 2 years of age. And this is how verification of my father's birth date came to be known. And it is this verification that was relayed back to the Department of Native Affairs by my father that enabled him to secure an official authorisation that stood in the absence of a birth certificate, making way for his enlistment in the services. And what was happening on the mission at the time, there was a register of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I jumped into the archives, which is always a bit perilous for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people because of the way in which we have been written about. So universities were complicit in the way in which these registers were developed. So the one for my father, where he was incarcerated at Cherbourg, which is outside of Kingaroy, the register there was, and the maintenance of that register was facilitated by the University of Sydney. And, and you know, because this was all the beginning of the user pay system, but using Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to do that. And so the register, it acknowledged a Vince Bunder, a B-U-N-D-E-R, my name's spelt B-U-N-D-A. And that Vince Bunder was 1/2 W. So the W was standing for white, followed by the number 6, and that was the age of the child. And because of the misspelling, I'm presuming that it's my father, but I don't know whether or not it is my father. And so based on the knowings of my 2 grandmothers, that means my father would have been born in about 1921. And so that's where we've taken that particular event and that particular time, tangled up with the legislation that that was my dad. All right. Now, Nissa is our research assistant, and as you can imagine, in the presence of you all, with all your certifications and letters after your name, she's very nervous. So please look after her. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
You can ask them to do some writing.
all right. So grab a pen, grab a piece of paper. You got a handout there on the table. And we're very lucky. We have Professor Nita Heiss in the audience with us here today. He's given us some tips, although I can hear her down the front disclaiming all of that. So choose one of your senses, choose one of your emotions to be able to describe how you feel in a particular place. Let's take this place. Okay. All right. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to be able to do that. Oh, sorry, the place where you come from. Sorry. It's a fundamental in terms of Aboriginal people declaring and pronouncing yourself on country, but to other Aboriginal people that you don't know. Who are you and where do you come from? So that's basically the question. Who are you and where do you come from? There's a Padlet on the sheet on the desk. So if you wanted to add your stories to that Padlet later, but we'll keep on going with the presentation.
So we just want to share a little bit of the findings from this teaching innovation grant that we've been working on, and we want to draw on some of the students' stories that, as examples, and we've been doing interviews with students as well. And we also want to just discuss the initial development of a student engagement framework in Indigenous Studies and do a little bit of storying with you as well. So Tracy's led the project and I've managed it. There's two other project team members, Associate Professor Stephanie Gilbert, who is here with us today, and Dr. E. Saunders. Nissa and Lisa Oliver's worked as research assistants on the project. Lisa's also been an associate lecturer within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies unit. And we've also worked with a reference group of Indigenous scholars at UQ, Professor Anita Heiss, who's with us today, Dr. Charlene Leroy-Dyer from School of Business, who's online, Jim Walker's in the School of Earth and Environmental Sciences, and Condi Canuto's in the School of Public Health. So we're really thankful to them as well. So the project's about building the evidence around strategies to enhance student engagement in Indigenous studies, and we've been trialling that use of storying as a reflection activity assessment to enhance student engagement. Do you want to speak?
So in the university are in the process of mapping those graduate attributes against our teaching. So they're the graduate attributes that we nominated that are associated with this particular project. And hopefully we'll be able to, the results that we've been able to get from semester one, and some of the work that's coming through from semester two teaching, is being able to show that our students are starting to understand that respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural difference in particular. We're very fortunate at UQ because we've got really great students anyway. So, you know, they are, maybe it's just us, but what we're experiencing within Aboriginal studies, we've got students of very high caliber being able to produce quite good articulate work, and their writings, the stories that they've been doing are showing that they're thinking more deeply and making those changes. The ones that are coded as ABTS are the ones that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies Unit are responsible for. Everything coded outside of that belongs to other schools within the faculty. So it allows us to be able to work within the resources that we have, because we only have a very small academic team within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies Unit. And wanted to with the that's want to be students, society students. There are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Developing. They started in the first year, but to develop it and refine it in the second year. And by the time they get to the third year, where you've got the option to either do an independent project based on, you know, your interests or matters that are really relevant within community, or they're working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So it's applied knowledge there.
It's a first year undergraduate course. There's about 50 students were enrolled in the first semester. They're mostly non-Indigenous students. There's a number of international students who are enrolled, and they're often across all different disciplinary areas. And there are only 3 Indigenous students who are enrolled. It's an elective course. Students can choose to do it. It's not a compulsory course.
Mm.
And then why story?
Okay, so most of us use reflections as part of the assessment, and we flipped that and started to call it storying based on the work that I've done. But I'm not the only Indigenous person who's written around the value of storying, and as particularly as a pedagogical practice. And it gave the students an opportunity to be able to write creatively, but reflect on their relationship to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so we wanted a technique to be able to bring these non-Indigenous students, primarily non-Indigenous students in our classes, along with us so that they could have a deeper understanding of the Indigenous issues that we were raising. I think somebody said this morning, was it Linda? Like, it's a whole 13 weeks of really sad and terrible stories. Sometimes that's what Aboriginal studies, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander studies can feel like. But yeah, we just wanted to try this particular approach to see whether or not that made the connection with the knowledge in particular.
So we called it a knowledge basket, and Tracy weaves, and so does Lisa Oliver, who coordinated the course. So that was one of the reasons we called it a knowledge basket. But it also, as Tracy mentioned, lots of Indigenous scholars have written about storying and also linking storying with weaving. So internationally, there's a lot of theoretical discussion about storying and weaving. So it was a 5-part like reflective journal that students had to do, and Tracy did a lecture within that talking about storying, gave examples from her own book, as well as talked and gave students guidance on how they might write their own stories. And then we gave them a prompt or focus question for each week to guide their storying as well. And in the first semester, they were marked and given feedback, and then that gave them some feedback to then write the next week's knowledge basket entry. And we also gave them, from Tracy and Louise Phillips's book, storying principles that they've written about to help them ground their work.
Yeah, I'll talk about it. Yeah, can you just flip back, Nissa? One of the things that Lisa said was, even though it was in a relatively sized class of 50 students, she wouldn't necessarily line up those reflections week by week, just because the pressure on her to be able to turn turn around and give the feedback was just a little bit too onerous. So maybe every fortnight, if you're thinking of, if you have that technique, and then there's the pressure is off you a little bit. Thanks, Nissa. So these are the principles that are put in place for storying, and primarily from my perspective, remember I wrote the book with a non-Indigenous colleague, was that Indigenous voices are often not the authority of our own voice and our own experience. And so storying changes that. So Indigenous people are the authors of their own voice. And because storying centres Indigenous voice, it takes it away from the margins, and it becomes much more integral then. I talked about jumping into the archives, but telling stories within Aboriginal communities does intersect that past with the present. So it's a lived experience. And of course, when you story, you go slow, you take the time. And so because it is reflective, it's very nourishing as well. Yep. All right. If you have a look at the handout, you can see on the back, the students have written some of their own reflections in relation to the course. Can I just say that we were deeply pleased with the way in which the students were responding to the knowledge that they were learning. You can see there is a very sophisticated technicality there in terms of writing. But we were very pleased too in terms of being able to understand the key ideas that we were trying to teach within the lecture and the tutorial. And the fact that students were meeting an assessment requirement, but also travelling intellectually, emotionally with us within the course. I think that was really, really beneficial. You can feel how that young girl, when she writes about being Tongan and talking about her grandfather, you can feel how she is changed there. Did we include the story about Tui's Forest on that list? Yeah. And that young one too, making that link between the human and non-human relations, which is the relativism that Auntie Mary was talking about this morning.
All right, so as part of my role with the project, I've been interviewing students. So last semester, I interviewed 10 students from ABTS 1000 about their experiences storying and their perceptions of it as well. So this semester, I'll have another 20 or so interviews to do with the two classes. So from those initial interviews, we already got some really great feedback and also learned a lot about how the students were valuing the story. So we found that most students hadn't done anything like this before. So particularly for students coming from maths, science or engineering, writing in a reflective way and incorporating their emotions into their studying was something really unique and often really challenging as well. So overall, we found that students really enjoyed the personal and subjective nature of storying and that it did enhance their engagement in the course. In particular, some students spoke about how storying and the time taken to reflect on certain difficult or new topics meant that they had a deeper engagement, which often led to them doing extra learning on their own. So going home and researching a topic more or talking to people about it, going outside of the university to keep learning. So by reflecting on the content in a more personal way, students developed an emotional connection to what they were learning. This helped them better remember the content, but also apply it outside of the uni. Of importance was that students felt like storying and the reflective writing was a safe space to share and also to learn. So students talked about how this was facilitated in class by sitting in a circle, or the teacher making sure that everybody had space and time to talk. So it wasn't always one person talking who was confident, that people could kind of take time and stumble a bit and not feel like they were judged. So finally, we found that many students enjoyed the frequency of the weekly storying because it gave them a time each week to sit down and to really reflect and process and learn more about each topic. So many students talked about how storying helped them connect with topics they had previously never thought about or just didn't think they had an interest in. So for example, one of the students said after the week on Indigenous art, they went to the art gallery for the first time in their whole life and they really enjoyed it. Another student, the last student on the examples, she started studying outside after the week on connection to country. Then for a lot of the students, international students who come from bilingual backgrounds, the week on language really helped them to apply a new lens to their personal lived experiences growing up as well, and then being here in a foreign country. So aside from all of that, we also got some really useful feedback on how to improve storying. So Caitlin will talk about that now.
Well done, Lisa. That was deadly.
So yeah, for the second semester, we also implemented it within 2 other courses, ABTS 3020, which is working with Indigenous people, and MUSC 2810, a music one, Indigenous Australian music. So I coordinate both of those courses, and we gave students more guidance this second semester on storying, and we also gave them more examples from the first semester of what other students had done. And we also changed it to not be graded. So we had a lot of discussion around that, and students also talked about that. And of course, there's literature written about that, whether you should be assessing reflective assessment and whether students will feel open to be able to write, openly within their assessment if it's graded. So, and the subjective nature of, assessing it. So we didn't grade it this semester. So it'll be interesting to see the feedback from students when Lisa does the interviews as well. So our initial findings, from the first semester are that it was a really creative way to engage students, and it got them really thinking about their own identity and positioning in relation to the topics. It also got them to think about their initial ideas and reflections and expectations and assumptions, and thinking about how that had changed as they learnt and, went along in the semester as well.
Okay, this is my sad effort to make real what Auntie Mary was talking about this morning in terms of what are the value systems that we need to be able to have in place to be able to underpin teaching and learning. So the first one is around location. So that very tragic drawing there is lamandra. So lamandra grass is traditionally used for weaving. So there's lamandra all over the campus. And what traditionally you do is you split the lamandra blade so that it becomes fine. Then you dry it. And then once it's dried, then you can dye it. If anybody has done this exercise and found a really successful way to be able to dye the lamandra, can you let the Indigenous person know? Because I haven't cracked it yet, though I'm trying. And then you wait for it to dry again. But for it to be malleable, sometimes you need to wet it so that you can still continue to work it. So what we did there was saying that the lamandra is earthed within Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander studies. We're using storying as a pedagogical technique to frame the teaching, the teaching and the learning for the students. Location is really fundamental. Who are you? Where do you come from? And we ask students to write about that. In terms of positionality, we asked them about their relationship to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So we've had students say, you know, that yes, they got to do some Indigenous studies when they were in secondary school. No, they haven't done that. Yes, I lived with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in my street. And then during the course, we want to be able to develop that relationality by the activities that we use, and the opportunities that we gave the students to be able to make greater senses of connectedness. We were fortunate in the sense that we had a little bit of money this year. We don't often have money in teaching, but we were able to take the students to Cherbourg. At Cherbourg, there's a ration shed museum. I know the education school has been up to the ration shed museum. And we also got the opportunity to give our students the chance of working with Black Card. And I know some of you have used Black Card in terms of that cultural capability training. And Black Card gave our students an Indigenous interpretation of West End and the South Brisbane area. So, and then as they became more and more exposed to the knowledge, and particular the knowledge that was given to them by Indigenous voices, then they were starting to develop a criticality from what they had known. And so they were starting to trouble the knowledge that they had grown up with. And what basically we wanted to be able to see was students understood the concept that there's two knowledge systems within this country. And so they were moving towards that particular way of thinking. Yeah. He is so proud, that boy. He is so proud. And so he should be. So this young man was one of our international students. What we did is, because Cherbourg is a 3-hour one-way drive, one-way trip. So Lisa, who was the coordinator for ABTS 1000, she taught that young fella about weaving, and that was his end product, and that was his little basket. So they wove on the bus and they wove back. Yeah, we had everything for them. Yeah. All right, so your turn. So you can work on the story that you were just working on, but maybe thinking about, maybe this is a little bit too raw after the referendum. This is a safe space. Okay. So what's your positionality in relation to Indigenous people? You can change the people to matters if you want. And there's the Padlet there. The code if you wanted to be able to add your story later. All right. Yeah, we'll spend a couple of minutes on that. We've written around this, and it's our work has been accepted. It's been peer reviewed, so we're hoping that this will be available in the new year. Yeah, there'll be a handbook on student engagement, and we'll be included in that. So I'll leave you 10 minutes for writing. Okay. I'm thinking.
Is it better?
Yeah, I've turned it on. Greg, I'm thinking about the course you have within EAD about, I think, Carol and Kelly, you named it working with, or there's something about working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And I know HABS has a similar type course as well. So I think that sort of name course in that particular way, it allows, and I would imagine Carol, you and Carol are already doing that anyway, but there's an opportunity there for students to be able to be reflective with the knowledge that they are learning. Okay. And particularly too, because there's those practical components too, where students can come back and then use storying to be able to reflect about the experience that they've had while they've been away. All right. For those of you who've been part of the community of practice, I know I have been talking about this for a long time, but it is actually finished now. Yeah. So it's the press book on the language of relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. For those of you who haven't stepped into that space, can I highly recommend it? Stepping into the press book space, and really that's the way in which the library wanted press books to be used, with course coordinators laying down all of their course information within a book so that the students can work into that space. So I think you'll find the language of relationships really beneficial around some really basic things that might be confusing for people. What's the difference between an acknowledgement and a traditional welcome? How do we actually use Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander writing in our assignments for students, or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors within our courses? What is the best type of relationship? What do I do when I have an elder come into my class? What do I do when what the university should do actually when there is a death of a significant member of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community? What do the flags mean? Because remember, in the making of that particular press book, which came out of a student staff project, student staff partnership project, remember we lost the authority of the flags. Remember they belonged to a commercial entity, and then we got them back. Yay, Linda. And yeah, so I think people will find it interesting. And the other thing about press books that I like is that you can add to them. They're not in and of themselves finished at this particular point of time. You can keep on adding to them. Anybody got any questions that Caitlin will answer?
I have a kind of basic question, because most of my questions are basic and I think I know the answer, but you talk about storying like a verb, not
Yes, it is.
storytelling.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah. So Louise and I actually name it within verbification within the book, and that's because we do see it as an act of doing. And I think then that makes it easy to be related to pedagogical practice, because it is in the doing. And in some respects, it's both. If I think about the way in which I receive stories, it was, you know, in part being a recipient of those stories, but then because the stories are repeated over generations, then at some stage you get to be the teller of the story as well. So you enact it too. Yeah.
Nice.
You do your online one? Oh, you don't have an online one?
No, I
was just getting ready. Oh, I thought you wanted one.
Kelly.
Oh.
Miss Kelly.
Thank you all for the presentation, and Nisa, for you to feel more welcome, I actually wrote mine in Spanish for you, which means it reads like a first grader. Oh, that's okay. Have you thought about, you've got this in the pedagogical space, but some students that I've worked with from a place of researching and inquiry have found the idea of storing and focusing on the relationships that happen through inquiry so invaluable. So have you got ideas too about how this could lead, not just from the pedagogical space, but into the research space?
that is the name of the book, Research Through with and as Storying. I think because it is at that undergraduate level, and we give students the opportunity to do that independent project, which is now
30, 50
4 credit points, isn't it? Yeah. So that gives them the opportunity to be able to use storying as research. What I will say is the transition in the students, I always want to call them the kids, the transition in the students from that first semester to second semester and walking into their new class and just seeing how bonded they were relationally. So I felt very, who was using the word this morning, hopeful. I felt very hopeful about that, that it was making an impact on the students. But yeah, of course, you could use it in research, for sure. So it's a tool, isn't it? It's a method.
I think it's more than a tool though, because for the students I was working with, it gave them permission to have a counter narrative to a dominant mode of research that they felt pressured to do. In one where they said, I'm actually want to build relationships through my research. I'm not trying to study people, trying to understand them. And that for them was powerful. And the book gave them permission to do that.
Yeah. And I see some Indigenous students in their doctoral studies, you know, starting to name their country within their place and their place of storying. So people will talk about, what's the one I've seen, Wiradjuri storying, you know, so I think that's lovely. Yeah. Didn't think it was going to go there.
Wiradjuri.
There, biggest Wiradjuri storyer over there. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions or hey,
Yeah, if you'd like to add your story later to our Padlet, we'd love to have a read. And there's also a spot for any other questions or comments that you'd like to make. And there's also a link for feedback on the session if you want to as well. And thanks everyone for joining us in person and online as well.
thank you.
today.
Thank you online.